Possibly more than any other genre, fantasy is what made me become a voracious reader. I quickly became enthralled with literary fiction and historical novels, and more generally, nonfiction classics, which is what I talk mostly about on this channel. But fantasy showed me how to open that ever present portal to new worlds, the portal that exists in every book, on the other side of paintings, in wardrobes, and in seemingly ordinary brick walls. That one that we can access through our imagination. Now, I may not have spoken much about fantasy here, as of yet, but what I love about fantasy is that it takes our reality and it shows us how, viewed from another angle, everything is so much stranger and more wonderful than we could ever have imagined in the first place. Now, in making this list, I realized that there are still a lot of gaps in my fantasy reading, so this is not going to be the 10 objectively best, greatest fantasy novels of all time ever written or anything like that. It'll simply be the list of the 10 fantasy novels that impacted me the most. The ones that got me into reading, the ones that made me love fantasy, and really opened my imagination. And to begin with, we have to start at the beginning, with The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is really the foundation of modern epic fantasy, the saga, the idea of multiple languages and history and the whole world and all of these kingdoms, and we have to understand everything in order to really go into the world of Lord of the Rings. Is classic hard world building, and it's the foundation of modern fantasy today. So this is really intended to be one continuous novel originally by Tolkien. The reason it was published in 3 is because of paper shortages post-war, so you should think of it as one novel. But I'm going to go more specifically here because Lord of the Rings, okay, that's an easy pick. Which part of Lord of the Rings do I like the most? I think if I have to pick a section, I would pick book 4. So Lord of the Rings is actually split into 6 books, not 3. And basically 2 sections are lumped together in the Fellowship of the Rings and the Two Towers and the Return of the King. But the second part of the Two Towers, to me, is actually the most interesting and I think impactful part of Lord of the Rings. It's my favorite part of the story overall. It's where we have Frodo, Sam, and Gollum on the road towards Mordor, the taming of Gollum. The deepest darkness, I think, of the story really is in this part of the story. And it's that moment, that climax, if you will, before we see the resolution of the story, we decide if we're actually going to get where we're going. The ring is growing in its power, it's affecting Frodo, there's so much that's happening. I love the, I guess, emotional core of this element of the story, and so for that reason, to me, this is the most impactful part. But more generally speaking, Lord of the Rings is just one of the great fantasy stories of all time. I read this every year, every couple of years at least. I love the scourging of the Shire, the scouring of the Shire. Book 6 at the end as well is a part that's not included in the film version, but it really hits home the point that this entire epic journey is really about that return home. It's about that inability of Frodo to come home unchanged, and it's really a homecoming story on the coattails of an epic adventure. This is one of the greatest fantasy stories ever written, established modern high fantasy. Tolkien obviously didn't invent fantasy. It has many great novels, many great tomes that predate Lord of the Rings. But if you want to get into fantasy, this is a fantastic place to start. And the second book on our list is equally famous, equally foundational in the modern era. And I'm speaking, of course, of Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Now, this is one of the series that made me a reader more than any of the other ones. I read this so many times as a kid. It feels like going home every time I read this story. Extremely nostalgic, I think not just for me, but for my entire generation. It's one of those books that I read repeatedly growing up, and it's really that sense of discovery is so strong because in every grade, Harry is getting a little bit further into the world of the magic, a little bit further into the world of Hogwarts. And as he's discovering things, we're discovering alongside him, which I think is really beautiful. I've said before that I think that book 6 is the strongest book in the series, and I still hold by that because you get to hear a little bit more about Voldemort's past, and Dumbledore and Harry's relationship goes a lot deeper. It also becomes a lot darker. We see some of the tragedy start to unfold. This isn't just going to be a children's novel. This is becoming something much more substantial than that. But I think that if we're talking about the most fantasy elements, we have to talk about either book 4, which is The Goblet of Fire, or book 7, The Deathly Hallows, because those are the two where we get, I think, the most fantasy elements. In book 4, you get the Triwizard Tournament, you have dragons, you have merpeople, you have all sorts of different elements of magic, teleportation. And then in book 7, it's essentially one extended fairy tale brought to life through the tale of the three brothers, which is a really great story as well. Ultimately, Harry Potter is one of those stories that maybe is overread, maybe it's over talked about, but there is a reason that this story resonated with a generation. It's a classic hero's journey tale, one that is really resonant in our generation, but I think will remain so in future generations as well. Maybe not to the same degree as Lord of the Rings will, but it is absolutely a wonderful story and classic entry into magic through Diagon Alley. We have also platform 9 3/4. I love that portal to the magic world component of fantasy. It's something that I just absolutely love. And the soft world building elements as well. I think it's that similar threshold entry to the magic world structure that you get in Narnia as well. In Narnia, you get it so many different ways. In book 5, you get it through the portal, the portrait into the Dawn Treader. You get it through the wardrobe, most famously in the first book. But that's another one that we could easily include on this list. Now, book 3, the third book that I want to include is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is possibly my favorite Neil Gaiman book, but he's got so many entries that I could easily include in this list. I just love the idea of London below, London above, that idea that there's cracks in the civilization. There's like this world that exists for the people who fall through the cracks, the ordinary components of life, the stations, the sidewalks, everything, all those cracks lead to an underworld, and that underworld has a vibrant life to itself. And I think that social commentary as well is quite interesting. The idea that all of the social discontents, the people who fall through the cracks, they have purpose and they have meaning as well. Gaiman is just such a great writer, so whimsical. You can definitely see the influence of some other great fantasy writers on his writing, which I think is one of the wonderful things about reading within a tradition, that you get to see the evolution of that tradition. You get to see people growing and people taking different interpretations of past stories, essentially, because we're retelling the same stories to different generations. We have to tell them in different ways. And Gaiman is one of the masters of doing this. That inspiration for the forgotten and marginalized people leading to a wonderful world underneath the world that we live in. A little bit like the Harry Potter in that respect. Now he's got so many other ones, Stardust, American Gods, that I think are really great in terms of their fantasy elements. And, you can really explore fantasy through so many elements of his work. And that connection with Terry Pratchett, that friendship and mentorship in many ways as well, is very evident in his work. Now, book 4 here, A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. So this is the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. I think this is my favorite of the books, possibly just because it's the entry into this world. But to be honest, one of the big challenges with A Game of Thrones is the fact that it's unfinished. Being incomplete leads to, the further on in the series you get, the more I think frustrations, at least for me, that I noticed, because I'm like, oh, is this going to get resolved? Like, I don't even know if this element of the world building is going to be resolved. But Martin is really great at world building. He's got a lot of political and dynastic elements to his world building, which I think is really interesting, obviously based off of a lot of medieval truths, things that actually happened. So that is interesting. He's got morally complicated characters, which is something that we're not as used to in fantasy. So now it's become more common, but I think he really did something unique there with how complicated and complex every character is. There's no simple good guys and bad guys, and if there are simple good guys, they kind of just die. Like they're not the moral core of the stories. The stories are the broken characters and their redemption arcs, or fall and then redemption arcs. So there are elements to this, that medieval history transformed into fantasy that I really love. He's really great at some of the landscape description passages, really beautiful magic system around the edges of the story, and then as dragons get introduced, that becomes even more interesting. Supernatural forces kind of start coming more and more, which is also very interesting. Past and present fights, so you get that sense of history that you have in Tolkien as well, but you get it, I think, even better in Tolkien, to be honest. Tolkien's just one of the greatest at almost everything he does. But there are a lot of caveats to say with the Song of Ice and Fire series in general. One, obviously, is that it's incomplete, which is frustrating, and the second is that it's not appropriate for every reader. There's graphic violence, sexual content. It's really kind of a dark story, and so I wouldn't recommend it in the same way that I recommend some of these other ones, but it was one that I read in my teenage years, and it did influence my thinking about fantasy more generally. So I thought I would include it on this list. I didn't hate it. I didn't hate it at all, but I'm frustrated that it wasn't finished. I'll say that, to say the least. Now, number 5 on this list is another one that suffers from incomplete, and this is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. And honestly, this one brought me back into fantasy as a late teenager. It's really a compelling and beautiful story about the classic gifted character. But obviously, he's flawed as well, which is, I think, such a great theme in fantasy. And there's a good magic system, there's a good universe, there's a good educational system, kind of where you start learning about elements of this magical world that you've been thrust into. And so less like Narnia and Harry Potter, where it's our ordinary world and we walk through a portal to get into this new world. We're just thrust into this new world, but through a kid who doesn't really know this world yet, we get to learn it alongside him, which I think is very great, very helpful. Great, beautiful building. The second book is good too, but then there's no third book, so it's an unfinished trilogy, and that's really, I think, even more frustrating than The Song of Ice and Fire, because this one just, it feels like a trilogy. Even from the beginning, you're like, this requires another book. So hopefully we will get another one soon, but that's one I can recommend. But do be careful, because starting something that is unfinished is a whole can of beans, a whole kettle of worms, fish, whatever, all these metaphors put together. It's you're opening Pandora's box. Now, number 6 on this list is one that I just finished reading recently and I really enjoyed. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norman Juster. This is actually the current reading room selection that we're reading for our book club, the children's classic. And it has a lot of wonderful fantasy elements. It's really short compared to a lot of these other ones. So if you're looking for something a little bit faster, a little better pace compared to these major sagas or these unfinished epics, this might be a good place to start with. Milo essentially wakes up and he has this mysterious toll booth in his room. He goes into it and he enters a totally different kingdom. And it's a kingdom of wisdom. And you have Dictionopolis, I think, and it's Dictionopolis and Digitopolis, I believe, are the names of the two worlds. But it's basically the word world and the number world. And there's these two kings, they're brothers, but they disagree about what's better, words or numbers. And you meet all these personified characters of like the spelling bee as a character, as an example. It's really hilarious. And through all these different characters and these battles and this mission to rescue the princesses of Rhyme and Reason, which is the kind of overall story. I won't spoil anything about how the story goes and what happens. It's just so fun and so it's so lighthearted, but really there's some deep wisdom, like in all great children's novels, that can be gleaned from this story as well. That wordplay is also so fun for both children and adults, and I think it really forces us to pay attention and to learn. And what more can be said about this book? It was really enjoyable. I guess that's what I'll say. Just to round this out, that rediscovery element of that ordinary world through this fantasy world is so much fun. Now, if you do want to read great classics or great children's classics as well alongside us, you're more than welcome to join the reading room. I will leave a link below for you to do that if you're interested. Number 7 on this list, one of my personal favorites, The Princess Bride by William Goldman. This is another really short one, kind of a detour, again, among these epic fantasies. It's a classic parody, so fun. It's obviously made into a wonderful film version. The film is super fun and very honest to the novel, which is nice too. In certain respects, you want it to go a little bit different. The idea of true love, the idea of revenge. You killed my father, prepare to die. Everybody knows this line. And, it's got giants and pirates and miracles, but kind of parodied miracles. It's really, really got wonderful, memorable characters as well. Inigo Montoya, of course. So fun. But I think that there's a lot of genuine wisdom and emotion and wonderful fantasy beneath the surface on this, which is exactly what we're looking for when we want great fantasy novels. I've also been so enamored by the idea of fictional books within books, and Goldman's fictional abridgment of Morgenstern's The Princess Bride is what is the source material for this. So basically, Goldman opens by saying, this book is actually an abridgment of this real book by S. Morgenstern, but I cut out all the boring bits, so it's just the main elements of the fantasy, which I thought was super funny as well. It's playful. It's, kind of pattern interrupt, I think, for us when we're reading this genre. It really satirizes the fantasy conventions of the genre, which is so fun and exactly what we want in this kind of a book. Number 8 on this list is one that is a work in progress for me, The Once and Future King. So I've only read the first part of this, The Sword and the Stone, so I can't comment on the whole thing, but I love the Arthurian legend. Mort to Arthur, so many other great Arthurian tales. It's really a quintessential core component to Western literature. You have to understand the tales of King Arthur. He's one of the most important characters in English literature in particular. And the Knights of the Round Table and everything that comes alongside that with Merlin. But The Once and Future King, I think, is maybe the best modern, at least of the ones I've read. I feel like it's the most complete, interesting take on the Arthurian legends. Classic, it's become a classic in the fantasy tradition really because of this. Merlin, great character, very interesting. The themes of transformation, which are kind of reflecting all the way back to like Ovid's Metamorphosis, so cool. Education is a theme again in here. Whimsy, humor. It's a little bit hefty, I would say, in terms of how long even just the first part, the part about the Sword and the Stone, is already reasonably long. So it's not a quick read, but it's, I think, very interesting to explore this familiar mythology and do it with a very interesting psychological, philosophical lens, which is what we're looking for. You've got strange interpretations and strange components to it, which are fun. But I'm really looking forward to finishing the complete element of this. Number 9 on this list is The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. I had to include Terry Pratchett in this list. He's one of the great practitioners of fantasy. My introduction to Discworld came through this book, and I haven't read many works in Discworld. I hope to read a lot more because I do love the way he approaches writing. I love his endless footnoting. It's so fun. I think it's really interesting. The idea of like the way he opens it, you got this flat world that's carried on elephants that are standing on a giant turtle. It's just like super hilarious the way that he approaches this. You really have a interesting hero in this story, classic reluctant hero in many ways. Kind of like I love the theme here of being a fantasy tourist, like the taking your luggage on the path and kind of going into the fantasy world is something that is explored as well in The Color of Magic, and I imagine in other Discworld books as well. It's really just inventive and playful. Pratchett is very witty, and it's really just one of those stories that I think if you're interested in the fantasy genre, you really can't go without. Again, the tangents, the footnoting, so fun. I love how he uses comedy to build his world as well. It's honestly, when I think about this list, there are a number of them that are quite satirical takes on fantasy. I do appreciate that because it's such an important genre for us. But I do think that it is fun to satirize it a little bit because it's become such a big genre. And this was done exceptionally well, perhaps better than, no one better than Pratchett or A Princess Bride. Those are probably maybe some of the best. Now, there are so many possible entries that we could have for number 10 on this list, but the one I chose was Percy Jackson and the Olympians. This one was one, probably I just chose it because I loved it most as a child. It was a really huge part for me of developing as a reader. The idea of the Greek mythology hidden inside of America, basically, and how it starts with Camp Half-Blood, where you have all of these demigods, essentially, these half-bloods that are half a child of God and a mortal parent. And And they all have different parents, who are usually minor gods. But then a couple of them, the protagonists of our story, have major gods as their parents. And it's Poseidon in the case of our main character, Percy. And it's interesting, right? Like that story of how does this evolve? How it's almost like going back to the Harry Potter, going back to the Narnia. It's a mix of two worlds. You have ordinary children from one world thrust into this other world, and they're going to be the key to saving everything. It's got a lot of fun quests and prophecies and great introduction for kids, I think, to the Greek mythology and the world system. You learn about the gods and the monsters through the modern world, but also it encourages you to read about them in the ancient world as well. And also it's interesting because the main character has, I believe, he has dyslexia and maybe ADHD as well. So it's kind of like this is something that is looked at through a new, unique lens. And I think it's reframed in a totally different way, which I think is just super cool and empowering as well. But there's so many honorable mentions I could throw in this list. The Chronicles of Narnia. I think I love that as a great entry to the Portal Fantasy, or the Golden Compass, the His Dark Materials series, another great one. It's kind of an interesting reframe of Paradise Lost, where Satan is kind of the hero, or you could think of it that way as well. Amulet was a graphic novel series I really liked as a kid, and Watchmen was another one that's kind of more of sci-fi maybe than anything, but so many on my fantasy to be read list. Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. Man, I should have read that a long time ago. I've read so many books about it. I've listened to podcasts about it, but I haven't read it yet, so I don't know. It's crazy, but that's just my experience. The Dark Tower by Stephen King, kind of the same thing. The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, just so long, and I know I'm going to love it, but getting into it is just an investment. So that's something hopefully soon. And then I should probably read some Sanderson at this point, just because of how unavoidable he's kind of become in the modern fantasy genre. But those are some of the ones that I absolutely am really looking forward to reading very soon. But looking back on this list, I think I've realized a few things. I realized that fantasy, it's done a lot for me. It's done more than just giving me wonderful reading experiences. It taught me a lot about navigating my own quests in life, my side quests as well. How do I fight my own dragons? How do I rise to the occasions that I'm required to rise to in my life? It let me kind of disappear for a while, sure, like that's a component of fantasy. You can go away from our world, but reading fantasy at its best, it's not mere escapism. It's a far cry from that. It's about becoming the heroes we need to be. And in many ways, if we consider the fairy tradition, or if we consider the mythic storytelling tradition that both of these predate fantasy by generations, fantasy really comes from some of the oldest and most human storytelling styles that we have available to us. And I still feel as though I've barely begun. I barely scratched the surface, but honestly, I'm kind of glad because there are so many great fantasy books that I still need to read. And that means that I have so many more awe-inspiring worlds that I'm going to be able to be visiting for the first time, in addition to all of the books that I hope to reread before the sun doth set. So, as long as imagination is alive, the portals are still open. So venture forth. But before you do, let me know which fantasy books made you fall in love with reading and which wonderful world I should enter next. I appreciate your comments. That means a lot, and I always am growing my to be read list. It's becoming honestly interminable at this point. But I look forward to hearing from you guys, and I will see you in the next one.